Hey, I think that's the first time we've ever seen a screen that says if you're playing this in Japan, you're doing it wrong. Usually it's almost always, hey, you're playing this outside of Japan, then that's a no-go. So I'm not entirely sure the first time I ever played Gun.Smoke, although I do know that I did play it before. I think actually it came pre-installed on my Caanoo. That's right, you ever hear about the Caanoo emulator system? Let's turn this a little bit down, this is quite a bit loud. Oh, interesting. So Gun.Smoke has the system whereby, depending on what button you press, you actually shoot in that angle. So anyway, the Caanoo is like a small little emulator system. Have you ever heard of the GPD Pocket? Or the Game Park Holdings GP32X? I believe that was actually one of the very first emulator systems. And so basically what it was like a small little portable emulation console that was sort of homebrewed together in a sense. It wasn't actually like an official release by any sort of place, and it sort of lived and died by its ability to emulate other systems. And somehow for the sequel, the Caanoo, they actually managed to get some officially licensed games. I think they were officially licensed. Another one was Warder. I know that one for sure. There was some other like side-scrolling shoot-'em-up kind of like this. And I forget what it was. That one was actually really tough. You know, I have the Caanoo in the closet. I could just like dredge it up if I really was that interested. But anyway, I'm pretty sure Gun.Smoke was one of those games. Now, just to give you some context on when abouts this was, Android was not really a thing. Well, okay, by the time the Caanoo came out, Android was starting to be a thing. And, well, one could use Android to make an emulation console, and there did in fact exist emulation consoles that tried to do exactly that. They weren't really good. Now, one of the main problems with Android, there's a continue function. Now, I believe there are checkpoints, but still, any sort of continue function in an arcade game should be celebrated. Well, at least an arcade game kind of like this. If I feel like a continue function in Pac-Man, for example, would kind of defeat the purpose. But anyway, we have the GP32X, and again, so the problem with Android emulator consoles was, in the early days of Android at least, there was a terrible audio bug, and so basically audio would kind of be played back a little bit delayed from when it actually happened. So you could like notice it where, well, for example, I even showed this off to a developer who sort of made such a device. If you press A button in Sonic, like, it typically makes like a little jumping noise when Sonic jumps. It's like, okay, but the jumping noise would be noticeably delayed from when Sonic would jump on screen. Now, I'm not sure if this was a kernel thing or if this was some sort of a deeper flaw, but that was just the complete bane of early Android emulator devices. But the GP32X, and of course the Caanoo, which I actually had, they were kind of running on a custom operating system, so they didn't have this problem at all. In fact, they were purpose-built to play games. Now, I believe the official tagline was that you could install homebrew on it, and then you could play your own games developed specifically for it. And in fact, there was even an online store or something, people could sell it. But as it turns out, people just wanted to play emulators. Emulators just kind of won out. And actually, this was kind of an interesting device because it doesn't really exist anymore. Nowadays, it's all like emulating devices. Actually, the GP32 Win, which is like a portable... If you've ever seen those Android emulator consoles, you probably envy that form factor for playing games. GP32 Win is that form factor, but it's a Windows PC. A Windows laptop, Windows netbook, really. But the fact that it's a Windows anything is pretty impressive. Like, it can even play Skyrim, albeit on settings that would make low-spec gamer jealous. But still, like, you can actually do it. And so, that was kind of, like, really weird back, like, that it's come to that now. And that we've kind of fully abandoned Android all over again. Oh my gosh, then you had the Pandora, which was, I guess, the envy of anybody who was into those devices at all. Although, as it turns out, like, actually buying a Pandora, aside from ponying up the $500, so basically the Pandora was Well, I guess now that I think about it, it was basically the GP32 Win, except it wasn't doing so much of the Win, it was more of a Linux. But still, the fact that it even existed, and for a mere $500, which I guess even accounting for inflation is probably a lot closer to the $300 given by the GPD Win than you might think. Okay, now we are in the fun part where you have to fight the actual bad guy. No, never mind. Fun part aborted. Now we gotta go back to this. Yeah, those are some good times. Actually, the Caanoo, okay. So a lot of these consoles, they kind of go for a D-pad, because, I mean, again, that makes sense. It's like, a lot of these retro consoles, like, you gotta use the D-pad to control. Like, Super Nintendo D-pad, Game Boy Advance D-pad. PlayStation, not D-pad so much, but it at least started that way. Also, none of them could really run the PlayStation. Which really makes, like, the PlayStation 1 emulation and all those Android things, the fact that it's, like, nearly effortless there is still somewhat impressive to me. Granted, they haven't figured out the jitter thing, but even on desktops, you still haven't really figured out that whole jitter thing. Oh my gosh, we stopped moving, but it still feels like the screen is moving. Maybe that's because of all of the crap hurled at me. This is actually a fairly engaging checkpoint shoot-'em-up. I know technically it's a run-in. Okay, good. It was waiting a long time to give me that continue screen. But the Caanoo actually had like an analog joystick. And so, on one hand, that made it terrible if you wanted to play anything with a D-pad, especially because the joystick was actually kind of not the best. But it was amazing for Neo Geo games, because Neo Geo, its analog sticks work the best for that. So, honestly, that was just my portable little Neo Geo machine. And frankly, it worked for it. It was amazing. That was really my Neo Geo heyday. Like, I barely even play Neo Geo games anymore. It's because they're not quite so convenient. It's like, yeah, all I've got to do is fire up a computer and play some Neo Geo games, but even still, there's that one sort of step hanging out in front of me. With the Caanoo, it's like that was just by my bedside, so I had Neo Geo games anytime I darn well pleased. I think there were still some minor issues, like it wouldn't quite run full speed, and there were maybe some like sound issues, but honestly I played that thing so much that it's like I started getting more acquainted to those sounds than the actual real ones. To this day, like, when I beat Magical Drop 3, I still think it's too noisy, because if I recall correctly, the Caanoo couldn't quite render the other sounds that play at the end of the Magical Drop, and so it just kind of like plays half the noise, and all you get is this sort of rhythmic bass thing. It does work. It's pretty good. It's just, so you can almost press two of them at the same time and shoot in two directions at once. I feel like on one hand, I've really been neglecting talking about the game as I played, but on the other hand, it's kind of incredibly straightforward. I mean, you have the different buttons to shoot in different directions, which, okay, that's kind of a little bit revolutionary. But the actual mechanic itself, I mean, yeah, it's nominally a run and gun, but it has a lot more, I feel like in its DNA, it has a lot more in common with an actual shoot 'em up. Now, I will say, the use of checkpoints is actually pretty brilliant. Because, I mean, you've got this one part, and it's like, it's tough, but it's approachably tough. I feel like if I give it enough time, then I can actually make it all the way through. But, well, we'll see if I actually make it through. I'm not gonna bet on it. I don't think you should either. Maybe I'll just go back to talking about the Caanoo. Actually, yeah, so this kind of brand of, like, custom operating system retro handheld really doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, the last time I saw it was the GCW Zero. People were trying to kickstart their own sort of retro console in this sort of vein. And I mean, well, they made it. It worked. It was just maybe a little bit too expensive. Because if there's one good thing about the Android portable handhelds, I mean, they're made in China on the cheap. But that's an important aspect, on the cheap. Like, you're not having to shell out $300 for one. It's like you can get a pretty good one, top of the line, for like $200. That's pretty good. And it can even play like it can play what you want it to play. Like, you pay $200 for a video game console, you'd expect it to at least at least be able to attempt to emulate GameCube emulation. And they can try, and they can do okay. Whereas, like, GCW 0, I'm pretty sure that thing can barely do PlayStation 1. And you try to do, like, GameCube on it, well, I don't even think anybody's bothered. Of course, it doesn't help that that was probably in the days before Dolphin. Wow. The days before Dolphin emulator. You're gonna have to, like, sit down your children one day and you're like, you know that Dolphin emulator that you love that we play GameCube games on? Yeah, there was a time that didn't exist. And they're like, what? That's impossible. How did you play GameCube games in high def? And you're like, you know what? We didn't. And they were like, those are sad times, Daddy. I never want to go back to those times ever again. Yeah, so they're just kind of a dying breed. So it's actually kind of interesting. It's like, it's hard to explain just exactly what the Caanoo was, because it's a type of device that just sort of, by and large, does not exist these days. And in a sense, it doesn't really have to exist. Now, the GCW 0, I would have been all over that. It's just, as I got older, I kind of got used to more creature comforts. Say what you will about Android and how it's not exactly a coherent system, but there are certain things that you can, like, take for granted. That there's a screenshot feature, I mean, hey, it's baked right into Android. I was doing pretty good, though. There's a screenshot feature, it's baked right into Android, so you never have to worry, hey, does this emulator support screenshots? It's like, home start, emulator supports screenshots, what do you know? And also, you can sync your saves using Dropbox. That's maybe not so important for me nowadays. All I find myself playing are real games, and arcade games that never save anything anyway. But now, okay, I might be just completely wigging out, and I might just be completely paranoid here, but it kind of feels like my shots travel further if I don't press the button as much. Maybe a few pixels. I'm probably just imagining it. You know how it is. Sometimes you play a game and, like, you kind of get an intuitive sense for the controls, but the problem is your brain is a little too good at sensing patterns, and it starts seeing things it really shouldn't, mostly because they're not true. And so you start kind of imagining, you're like, oh man, I always figured this thing was how it worked, but it's like, nope, that's actually not how it works. So it's like, I always figured that you would shoot further if you didn't press the button so fast. But nope, turns out that's not true at all. Okay, I'm not gonna let this guy make a monkey out of me for like the 5th time in a row. Oh, I see, so he's invincible when he's wiggling around on the floor like that. You know, I kind of wish my guy could wiggle around on the floor like a wiggle worm, like an invincible wiggle worm boss. So, does the world need dedicated emulation consoles anymore? Probably not. I feel like the GPD Win is sort of the ultimate evolution that is basically a laptop, but in the right form factor. Because, I mean, once you get to, like, laptop, then it's like the world is your oyster, man. Any sort of form factor, any sort of program you want, it can run. Now, granted, you have to keep in mind the power constraints, i.e. it's basically as powerful as a netbook. But you can do some pretty fun things on a netbook. And plus, too, yeah, it might be running on integrated graphics, but it's at least integrated graphics from the last few years. Oh, yeah, that's right, because the netbooks, they kind of came out at a time when integrated graphics was, like, Intel was just starting integrated graphics. So, like, it could work without a graphics card, and that itself was mildly interesting. But the thing is, the graphics were just kind of terrible. You couldn't run any sort of gaming. Whereas integrated graphics nowadays, it's like, well, you can't run the latest games, but you can run a game. Like, it's possible now. You don't even necessarily need to not buy a graphics card. Of course, if you want sweet RetroArch shaders like this, you probably do actually have to buy a graphics card. I actually tried doing RetroArch and tried doing some shaders on my tablet. And I mean, my tablet is not especially powerful. So you're telling me this whole time, I could be on a horse, and I could be like shooting people off of my white horse. my noble steed, as it were. It feels like the horse can absorb some hits, which is very useful because, well, you've seen the way I play. It's a little bit sloppy and haphazard. Okay, time to focus in. Oh, jeez Louise. Well, actually, now, the Raspberry Pi has kind of offered sort of an interesting divergent timeline. It's allowed for the creation of, like, devices that kind of just use the Raspberry Pi as sort of the guts. And it's kind of an interesting, like, diversion, because it's like, on one hand, these sort of portable emulation portables were getting, like, bigger and bigger and more powerful and able to emulate more things, but the Raspberry Pi, it was just cheaper. And, like, I know in a sense it's like we should always want the biggest and best, but cheap is pretty cheap. And it's like, if you can get up to PlayStation 1 actually and be able to play that, then I mean, I don't know. Like, $60 is like, that's kind of worth it. And actually there's this Pi Boy that just kind of came out recently. It's essentially just like a shell for a Raspberry Pi Zero. But it's like, I keep hearing this voice in the back of my head. It's like, buy it, buy it, buy it. Have a Game Boy again, buy it. And it's kind of cool because it actually, well, you've seen those like USB Super Nintendo controllers, and I mean, they're maybe not perfect, they're maybe not the absolute best thing in the world, but they can plug in and they are an acceptable standard level of quality. I bring this up because a lot of those portable emulation consoles, like, I really have no faith in what their controls are like. Now, you've heard of this Raspberry Pi Boy or Pi Girl, and it's like, I don't trust their controls. It just doesn't seem like it's worth it. And like any of those cheap Chinese consoles is like, oh my god, I always don't trust them. Have you ever used one of those? I bought the JXD S602, and oh my god, that D-pad was the stiffest piece of cow I've ever touched. Like, it would actually give me hand cramps. And like, I played through a few good games on it. I played through Live Alive. I played through the Mega Man Legends. I actually played through... Did I play through all 3 Mega Man Legends games on that accursed device? So in one way, it is just... It holds a very, very special place in my heart. In another way, it holds a very, very infamous place in my hands. Because, man, that cramped me the heck up. My next emulation machine was the NVIDIA Shield, actually. Now, the NVIDIA Shield is weird, because on the surface, it seems perfect. It's like, oh, we got an analog stick. It's basically an Xbox 360 controller, right? And it can do, hold up. I think I got a good thing going with this horsey. Oh my god. Oh my god. There were a few times there when I kind of felt like I didn't deserve it, but it's like, on the other hand, I've been playing that for like 10 minutes, just that last part. It's like, yeah, I probably did actually deserve that. And yeah, if that felt like a long time for you, oh my god. It was twice as long for me. Holy cow. Well, if I remember correctly on the Caanoo, this is where my patience would lapse, and I would just stop playing. Because, I mean, you think it got hard last time. Oh, baby, it's only gonna get harder. But anyway, yeah, the NVIDIA Shield. Now, on paper, the NVIDIA Shield was a super powerful gaming console, and it had basically an Xbox 360 controller, but oh my gosh, there were still little weird like hardware quirks. Now, one thing that's so annoying about these like Chinese emulator machines is like there's always something wrong. Like, oh, made it to the high score list. Your message, please. My message is one of peace, one of worldwide appeal. Cat. But anyway, there's always something wrong. Like the JXDS 602, like, if I recall correctly, that could never actually output video. Or maybe it could, but it had no, like, USB in, so you could play, like, the actual machine on a TV, but it's like, at that point, why even bother? Why not? I don't know. You couldn't do, like, a second Nomad, like, plug in an extra controller and, like, play with a friend on the TV thing. And then there was no support for any extra things. I don't think it had Bluetooth. Actually, I guess that one was not so bad in hardware niggles, although if you did it wrong enough, then like it would just turn off on you or something. I do remember there was some sort of like it could get stuck in a boot loop or something if you did something wrong aspect lingering over things. But oh my god, the Nvidia Shield, just a few tiny little things that went wrong, but like those are kind of important things. So basically the A button, sometimes when you pressed it, it would register twice. And it's like, what the heck? The A button! The freaking A button! That is the most important button on the entire controller, and you're telling me that's what you got wrong? Now, I'm not necessarily singling out the A button. It felt like all of them kind of did the same thing, but oh my god, really? Are you serious? And then, let's see, what other silly thing did that do? The audio would, like, get loud and then it would get soft. So, like, it had really good speakers. It had really good speakers. But, like, I always wanted to just kind of set it up as sort of a portable movie studio or whatever and just watch some things on it, but no, you friggin' cannot, because the volume would get a little louder, and then it would get softer, and then it would get louder, and then it would get softer. And it's like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this? What the heck? Oh my god. Not to add to the fact that, like, the D-pad was, well, okay, it was basically like a 360 controller, so the D-pad was, like, overly stiff, basically unsuitable for use in gaming. But the analog stick is, well, it's an analog stick. I mean, it works. You can play old age games on it, but it just doesn't feel right. And so, yeah, I've always been looking for that holy grail kind of video game emulation system. Okay, so the closest I've gotten, the most recent one, well, okay, I guess there are two more. One of them is I bought a cheap Android phone, and I put that on a $40 Bluetooth, well, one of those 8-bit-do SNES controllers. Actually, that's the exact same SNES controller I use to play anything that's not an arcade game on this channel, so I mean, there's nothing wrong with the controller. It actually had like this little clip-up accessory you could buy, where you could like clip it to a phone. That accessory is pretty good. The only catch is like you have to disassemble it every time you want to charge the controller, which is massively annoying, to say the least. It also is running off like a $40 Android headset, well, a $40 Android phone, which I mean is kind of cool, kind of cute that, oh no, I don't think they were 40 bucks, I think they might have been 20. No, I think they were 40. But it was kind of cute that you could buy like this $40 phone and like hook it all up and play it on it. It just seemed ridiculously cheap to me. And I mean, it was mostly good. Like what it did pretty well. Unfortunately, the controller made it a little bit top-heavy, so it wasn't so great for like long extended play. Also, the phone, being like a cheap Android phone, could not handle like even Game Boy Advance games. It could handle Super Nintendo games just fine, and it could handle Game Boy Advance games for the most part. But like you play a game like F-Zero, and it's like, nope, that's pushing it too far. It just will not play that full speed. But like Mega Man Battle Network, it's like it can play that at full speed, like 90% of the time. So I guess, in a sense, that's 90% speed. And so it did a passable job. It was alright. And then, okay, my most recent and arguably craziest setup is basically I have a 30-foot HDMI cable, a 30-foot USB cable that I run from my computer into my bedroom. And then it leads into like a small portable screen. I've got one of those, they're like the Bluetooth controllers that you can put on a tablet. But the cool thing is they actually work off USB, and they work like just regular X input devices. So basically I put one of those around the screen, and then I just play off that thing. Now unfortunately this has never quite exactly worked. Like the most recent issue was like the sound. It just seems to cut out. And so without sound, it's like, well, that kind of sucks. I even wanted to play it this weekend, but nope, no sound, so no go. But, oh, and I was doing so well, too. But anyway, there's that dragon there. And it's like, I could see him dangling his tail in my face, that pie boy. Maybe that's the next bet. And it's like, oh man, you gotta chase that dragon, man. You gotta chase that dragon. Will I chase it? Honestly, I don't know. But I got one finger on the buy button. Well, on that note, this cat's gotta do some comparison pricing.